Welcome back in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Birds 365 here on JAKIB Sports. Joined now by Mike Gill, getting ready for this Week 12 matchup, Eagles versus Rams this weekend. Mike, how you doing on this Wednesday morning, brother?
Woke up a little earlier than I would like to, but I'm well caffeinated now.
All right.
You like a well caffeinated Mike Gill on a Wednesday, or would you rather the drab?
We get that powerful voice going early in the morning. I like that, Mike. So, where should we start? Should we start with Big Fangio and this defense, or should we start with little Joel Embiid?
Oh, geez. I got tweeted at by the national ESPN radio morning show this morning about Joel Embiid. So I don't think I need any more Joel Embiid conversation this morning, but I will give it to you if you'd like. I have strong opinions on that. However, I did see your Damo tweet, and I think it's a very interesting conversation about the Steelers. When you were on my show, I asked you, the Steelers blitzed Jaden Daniels 53% of the time. And that seemed to be, hey, that's what you got to do to this guy. Blitz him, blitz him, blitz him. And the Eagles blitzed him about 10% of the time. So I think it's a great example of there's more than one ways to do something. The blitzing crowd who just constantly wants to blitz can say, you don't have to blitz all the time, and you can still get the job done. You know, You guys were talking right about at the end before I came on about you don't want to blitz. You want to keep that extra guy. I had Malcolm Jenkins on my show about 2 years ago, and this was about John Gannon. And everybody was complaining that John Gannon didn't blitz enough. And Malcolm Jenkins said, any coordinator worth his salt does not want to blitz or have to blitz. A blitz is a gimmick. And a coordinator doesn't want to have to use a gimmick to get to the quarterback. And, you know, it's very natural for fans to want something gimmicky. That's what marketing is. Do something gimmicky to grab you and bring you to our product. Like, I don't know, Mike Tyson fighting Jake Paul.
Oh, get me started on that.
Yeah. That's a gimmick that works. That's why blitzes work. It's a gimmick to grab fans because it's aesthetically pleasing when it works. What the Eagles are doing right now is very admirable because they are not blitzing and they don't have A-level edge rusher. That is what I think is pretty interesting about how the Eagles defense is succeeding without having a TJ Watt or a Micah Parsons or even a Hassan Reddick.
Yeah. And one thing when I remember saying on your show about the Pittsburgh stuff, I do know one thing about Vic, and Vic does not care what other people do. So I think I mentioned that on your show. He's not looking at what somebody else is doing, and I'm going to copy that. He does not care.
Well, we hear so much about it being a copycat league, and yet here's Vic Fangio saying, you blitz 53% of the time, I'm not going to follow that. So, you know.
And by the way, he would if he felt that was the best way to win with his talent. But, you know, from his perspective, and I think a lot of this is lost because of what you mentioned and the splashiness of having a Hassan Reddick level edge rusher, and the Eagles don't have that. I think the perception is that the defensive front has gone downhill, and they've been off the charts for, you know, since the bye week, playing at a high level. They're just doing it a different way, and it still remains the strength of that defense. So when those guys are getting home and creating pressure, I mean, it's dumb to blitz. It's dumb.
Well, we see so many times, especially, listen, there are times and places you can pick your spots. The Eagles have done a great job of picking their spots this year. And a lot of teams have, look, some teams are predicated on the blitz. And like Malcolm Jenkins had told me, look, it's a reason to cover up that you don't have good enough personnel. If you don't have the personnel, yes, you're going to be a coordinator that has to send more pressure. But that's what makes the Eagles interesting, because you would think they fall in the category of not having the personnel and therefore having to do something kind of gimmicky to generate the pressure.
Yeah, they haven't because Jalen Carter's a big part of it, and the group as a whole. Josh Sweat's having a big year, even though maybe the numbers aren't there from a sack standpoint. I think everybody gets boiled down to sacks, and really, I remember, Minnesota is always at the top of pressure rate because they blitz more than anybody else. Brian Flores, but they blitz more than anybody else because their corners aren't very good in aging.
I think that's
And
a big part of this answer, John, is you just said their corners aren't very good. And I talked to you about this yesterday. The Eagles' corners are pretty good. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell has turned into a guy that you have to talk more about as why this defense works.
yeah, well, all of it. Cooper, Darius Slay still playing at a high level. So, yeah, I mean, the back seven, I think we all looked at that and said before the season, we haven't even talked about the linebackers yet. We'll talk about the linebackers. It looked like on paper, it looked like a weakness. And it has been an unbelievable strength. So, yeah, I mean, the players deserve most of the credit as they typically do. And they deserve most of the blame as well when things go poorly, but they deserve most of the credit. But boy, Vic is a heck of a teacher. Because I talk all the time about this scheme, and I haven't liked this scheme for a while. And I always bring up Honest NFL, especially this week, because he charted the whole game defensively. All Eagles fans, if they're interested, should go check him out at the Honest NFL. He charted the whole game defensively against Washington. And how much zone they played. It was astonishing. But he teaches it better than anybody else. And that's the key to it. Because, if you go back to last year in Miami, you got this Hall of Fame cornerback who doesn't want to play in this defense because he's the best cover corner of his generation. And he doesn't want to play a bunch of zone. And even Xavier Howard, who was a 3-4 time Pro Bowl cornerback, those guys don't want to play that way. And it's counterintuitive to say, all right, you were one of the most talented cornerbacks who ever lived, and he's not as good in the defense as maybe somebody who accepts the role and is excelling at the role. So in a weird way, it's better to have guys who are sort of a blank palette who haven't done anything and don't know enough to complain. And I want to do this and I want to do that because that's how you get paid in this league. It's all come together. It's like a perfect storm. And these guys are it's sort of like Jordan Mailata. Stoutland talks about it all the time. He didn't have any bad habits to break down because he never played football. And Stoutland grew him from ground zero.
Right.
Whereas if you go to college, you got all these bad habits you're trying to fix. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, and listen, I think we always have preconceived thoughts about what a team might be or a player might be. And it takes a lot for people to change those thoughts and then accept what they might have changed into, because you don't want to change your thoughts. You want to say your initial thought was right. And that's where this believing in this defense is hard, I think, for people, because the linebackers, these guys aren't any good. The linebackers, they didn't put any money into these linebackers. Well, now that they're playing really well, are people changing those thoughts and saying, you know what, I believe in these linebackers? Same with, the edge rushers and Quinyon Mitchell being a rookie. You don't know anything about him. Darius Slay, was he going to get old? People, I think, last year thought he was slipping a little bit. So I think the preconceived notion was this defense wasn't going to be any good. But have we allowed ourselves to believe now that the defense is actually good, or is it a byproduct of the opponents they have faced? I think that's where we are right now with this team.
I think you're spot on. I mean, if reading the comments on here on Jacob and just where everybody is, that seems to be where it's at. I guess in a way you're cautiously optimistic, where I think we can be good, Mike, but how good? I mean, right now we're number one. Like we
Right.
literally are talking about the number one
Number
defense in the
one.
I mean, are we the number one defense in the NFL? I don't know, but we are right now.
Gannon had the number 2 defense in football, and nobody liked that defense. So
yeah. By the way, Vic has never had a number one defense.
yeah,
I
think the one team that they really handled for the most part was Cincinnati. That's probably the best offense they have faced. Green Bay in week 1, and Green Bay had a pretty good night against them, but the Eagles were kind of learning who they are and what they're doing.
Yeah,
but,
doesn't week 1 kind of fall into that category of
yeah,
you can't take too much from it?
Yeah, I don't know that you put a lot of stock in the week 1 effort, but the Cincinnati game is really the one where you're like, okay, that offense has done a really good job against just about everybody they've played since that game. I mean, God, Joe Burrow threw for 5 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, 400 yards, another 350 and 4 touchdowns. So they've been having their way against these defenses, and they were not able to do that against Philadelphia. I don't know that one game against Cincinnati is enough to change people's opinions to now buy into the defense. However, you're going to get some tests coming up here. This Rams offense, not great, but they have some weapons. They've had some injury issues. So I don't know if they shut down this Rams team, will people on Monday be like, all right, I'm buying into this defense now? Will it take them shutting down the Ravens in 2 weeks? So I'm very interested to take the temperature of people on this defense, because when you tweeted out, John, that they are the number one defense, I'm thinking back to the John Gannon defense that was number 2 in the league, and people hated that defense.
Yeah, well, they hated the guy running it. They don't hate Vic yet. We'll see how it shakes out. But, it's interesting. You look at the schedule. You and I talked about this in 2020. If you don't believe anybody's anything, you can't beat anybody. So everybody's like, who can you beat? Kansas City? And guess what? They're not even playing that well offensively this year. Buffalo, Baltimore, maybe. Green Bay, maybe. You already played Minnesota, maybe. Who else? Anybody? Detroit, obviously. Yeah, should have mentioned Detroit. Other than those teams, who can you play?
I don't know. It's perplexing because I don't know what you guys think, where San Francisco fits in all this. I mean, they're 5-5. They're in some, I don't want to say in some real trouble. That division's up for grabs. But they're starting to slip a little bit from the wild card, with Minnesota only having 2 losses. There are 3 losses behind them. Now, Washington at 7-4, but we know Washington's schedule is pretty favorable. So I don't think they're just going to fall apart. And Green Bay would be the other team. So San Francisco is a team that I think most teams would say.
Yeah, I think you put them in at least you put them off to the side and worry. That would be the one team coming out of that division where I would have some concern with.
And they are the example of the preconceived notion and you not wanting to shift your opinion, because the preconceived notion is this San Francisco team is going to be really good. They went to the Super Bowl and they didn't change any personnel. They did have some injury issues, but even with McCaffrey back and now Ayuk's out for the year, does he make that big of an impact? Sure. I don't think we think he made as big of an impact, but because everybody kind of, I think, perceives that it's McCaffrey, Debo, Kittle, but you lose Ayuk, who's a 1,000-yard receiver for that team, and you're seeing they're having some problems.
Yeah, and Kittle was out last week. So if they get healthier and get everybody minus Ayuk, who they're not getting back, they could be a problem. But that's somebody that if they do get hot, you probably don't want to see in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'd much rather see the Commanders in the playoffs than the 49ers. I mean, come on.
Everybody.
Well, there's an offense. Washington. Do we buy Washington's offense to say Philly shut that offense down pretty well? I got to buy in.
They shut that offense down amazingly well. But I do think when you talk about styles, that's what I was going to bring up. Really, the rest of the season, I think this game is the worst style matchup for the Eagles. The rest of the season, offensively, I'm talking about. Not the best team. it's a quarterback that knows what he's doing, that has good receivers that are going to play and have been out, and you're not going to be able to fool them or scare them.
Yeah.
Like Jaden Daniels didn't even look outside the numbers because he didn't know what he was seeing. That's not going to happen with Matthew Stafford.
Well, and I guess I don't know that is he still feeling the effects of that rib problem that he just couldn't pump it down the field any further than that because
Maybe.
he looked really tentative in some of his decisions.
Maybe that factors into it. But when you don't even try, like when you have a great receiver, the Eagles do it with A.J. Brown, whatever receiver, Tua does it with Tyreek Hill, whatever great receiver you want to bring up, Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase. You saw the Eagles did a great job against Cincinnati, but Cincinnati took shots throwing the football to Jamar Chase because he's Jamar Chase. He didn't even take a shot.
And that's what I find interesting is, we keep talking about receivers coming up. They've played Chase. They've played Lamb. They've played McLaurin. And hasn't been much there for those guys.
No.
So if those guys aren't getting what they generally expect to get, which receiver is going to have that big day against you?
Well, I think the difference you're going to see this week, Mike, is you're going to see him in the slot. Now, I'm not saying I don't believe in Cooper DeJean, but it's going to be his first consistent test, play after play, where Cooper Kupp's probably going to be in the slot. Puka Nacua can even play some slot. It's going to be interesting to see how McVay tries to throw them off with that or what Cooper DeJean's able to do.
These two,
with Kupp in there.
This duo of receivers definitely, I think, is going to be an interesting matchup because they're not, your big physical number one guys. They're these small, quick, kind of get in space type of receivers. And Cooper, as you mentioned, he's a bigger slot guy. Is he going to be able to keep up with the quickness of some of those guys in the slot? So I find this offense to be a very intriguing matchup for what the Eagles like to do on defense. And they like to play a lot of zone, so maybe they just let these guys catch. And one of the things that's been underrated about the Eagles' defensive success really has been the fact that ever since they inserted Cooper, they tackle. I think Maddox missed a lot of tackles those first 2 weeks, not just him, but he was – when you can get somebody lined up, matched up against a slot corner and get some space and have a one-on-one tackling opportunity, if that slot doesn't make the initial tackle, that's where sticks get moved and drives get extended when you can. And that's one thing about the Eagles offense I feel like they need to do more of is get these guys the ball. And they did a little bit more of it, I guess, last week. Get the ball 6-7 yards down the field, let them catch it and make someone miss. No one can tackle in this league. And I don't think any slot safety corner wants to try to come up and tackle A.J. Brown one-on-one. So give him the ball short and let him make people miss.
Yeah. All right. We'll go to the offensive side of the ball because, they're top 5 now. But it's not the top 5 we expected. I think Zander often points out that Kellen Moore was brought here for a reason. And it wasn't to be the best running offense in the NFL. It was about, taking the next step in the passing offense. Arguably, they've gone backward. I brought up, PFF now has the Eagles at number 2 overall behind Detroit. They grade 13 different categories. The Eagles are top 10 in virtually all of them, with the exception of special teams, which is understandable because of the issues with Jake. Run defense, where they're 14th, so they're mediocre, middle of the road, acceptable when you're doing so many other things well. The passing offense, though, 22nd. 22nd in the NFL. That's not where they want to be.
No.
How much of a concern is that for you?
Well, I guess there's 2 questions here. One, we talk about it all the time. You run because you have the lead. So are they not passing as much because they have leads and they don't need to pass? The question would be then, okay, if that's an acceptable answer, can they throw when they need to? And I think the answer to that has been yes and no, because they have had a lot of big plays in the pass game down the field. The question, I guess, is if they're down and they need those little 7, 8, 6 stick-moving plays, are they fluid enough in the pass game? That's where, for me, that's what my question. The pass game has been dynamic, but it's not fluid. It's not this like, man, this looks quick and timed, well-timed, and they just don't seem to have that comfort level of 1, 2, 3, bang, 1, 2, 3, bang. We're moving down the field quickly. Everything is down the field 30 yards, down the field 40 yards. So is that a good pass game or not? I don't know how to quantify that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Well, and that's why, by the way,
either, Mike, they haven't really been put in the position to have to pass to get back into a game or to keep. I mean, I mentioned Detroit's putting up 50 burgers like it's nothing. You're going to need to keep up with that team at some point. And
if you watch, Zander, if you watch Detroit, that's what they're very fluid, and they're fluid and they're big play. They have receivers that do both. And that's not, I talk about this all the time. You look at Detroit's personnel on offense, do you like St. Brown and Jamison Williams better than you like A.J. Brown and Smith? I think it's just a choice of style. But
I go Eagles there. I love St. Brown, but I don't
what those guys do, Jamison Williams is the big play guy. He's the guy that pops the top off. Where Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's, I don't want to say a possession guy, but he'll do the dirty work at times. He'll go the little 8. So they have the dynamic of both those guys. Then you put the tight end in the mix for them, Laporta, and you have another guy who is a very good weapon. And they do a great job of having 3 different types of receivers, using them well, having fluidity. Hey, this series, Amon-Ra St. Brown, we're going to you 7, 9, 6, 13.
Right.
And then Jamison Williams, bang. And it's just a symphony the way they do it sometimes, where the Eagles feel like they're always taking that big shot down the field, and you're just kind of hoping that. And look, give Jalen some credit. He puts the ball many times right where it needs to be. But how much can you depend on that in the big moments, in the big games against the big teams? Yeah,
Detroit also has the 2 different styles of running backs, which I love, the complementary styles of running backs. It's weird you say that, and I think about the Eagles receivers, and I'm like, do we not use our receivers the right way? Because Devontae Smith, to me, would be a great possession receiver like you're talking about, 9, 12, 14, 6. And I think AJ would be great at that too. They can both take the top off, but they both aren't one way or the other. They're both versatile receivers.
Here's my problem, and that's why I brought up. I think, when you talk about the Eagles having the number 1 defense, that's by traditional NFL metrics, which is total yards, which, to be honest, is meaningless, but I throw it out there because the fans love it. Whatever. Same thing with top 5 offense. I bring up the PFF rankings. They're more important to me because it's not about the yardage. It's not about, you can explain some of the yardage away by saying what you said, Mike. Well, they're winning late. They're running the football to close games. I don't care about the lack of yardage. This is about efficiency.
Yeah.
They're grading every play of every team, and they got Philadelphia ranked 22nd in the passing game. That's based on film work and efficiency, not yardage, not any of that bullshit.
So that's not factoring in that they have a lesser passing game when they're winning games. You're talking about, okay.
It's going play to play and grading what should have happened. What's the goal on this particular play? What should have happened? Was it up? Was it down? Was it in the middle? Was it expected? Non-expected? That's the problem. That's the problem. They're leaving meat on the bone in the passing game.
Yeah. Well, and they're leaving meat on the bone in the passing game, and I don't know how that's quantified in terms of what they're missing on plays that they do get yardage on. Or, like there are times, and you'll see it very rarely, A.J. Brown, quick slant, catches the ball 6 yards down the field and then drags a guy for another 4 to 5 yards. And you're like, bang, they go right back to it. And you're like, they're not stopping that play. Where did it go? Brown, 6 yards, bang. And they just get away from it. But the meat on the bone part too, which is frustrating, is these underneath plays that seemingly are there that Hurts doesn't pull the trigger on. in is he looking for a bigger play? Is he just not seeing those guys? Because it seemingly is week to week where there are multiple times where there's a guy open in the flat and those guys are open and you're missing them as well.
Yeah, well, and getting back to Kellen Moore, that's what he was here to do. So is he a success or is he not a success?
Well, I think you got to say he's been a success in that he has, well, that's a good question. He has, I don't know if he decided or shifted to, I have this weapon in the backfield and I'm going to utilize it. Now, I don't even know that he utilizes it enough or creative enough or, I don't know. I'd like to see them get Barkley the ball in the pass game a little bit more. Similar to what they did last week. There was a little dump off right over the top of the line of scrimmage, catch the ball, boom, 40 yards down the field.
Well, that's a positive. That's something he never did. And you see, it's a dump off. And by the way, nobody's near Saquon Barkley because they don't expect him to dump it off. And he makes one guy miss, and he's got a 40-yard game.
And not only are they not expecting them to dump it off to him, you've got to account for the other guys in the pass game, Brown, Goddard, and Smith. I mean, you can't just say, oh, we're going to keep our eye on this guy who never catches the ball because they got these three guys that can kill us. And that's what we talk about, you asked, has he been a success? I think you look at Saquon Barkley. I remember talking about this back in August. Hey, you signed Saquon Barkley, or whenever they signed Barkley, I guess, as we were getting ready for training camp. But you signed Saquon Barkley. I said, this guy better get like 18 to 1,900 yards because you had two backs here that got 1,000 yards rushing and added a couple extra 100 yards. So they were about 1,400 yard total yard backs. So you're going to pay this money for Barkley. He has to basically be better versions of those two guys. And voila, he has been. So kudos.
And that's where I was. I had him at 1,650 to 1,700.
Yeah.
Based on 1,300 rushing, 350-ish receiving, and he's exceeded that. So that's kind of my point. The Eagles have gotten significant.
They've been a success in utilizing that weapon. I don't know that they're maximizing the other weapon.
Well, here's kind of my point with Brian. What Brian Johnson was vilified, like he was the problem. Like he didn't have Saquon Barkley. If Brian Johnson's offense had Saquon Barkley instead of DeAndre Swift, is that a better offense than this offense?
I would hope. Yeah, I would hope. Right.
But that's not good, right?
I think what they did a bad job with Swift in is his strength was more in the pass game than the run game, and they didn't utilize him. They didn't accentuate his positives.
By the way, that's why.
Right. Well, and they didn't accentuate his positives, which is catching the football. So they didn't maximize the weapon that they had in Swift. It's a different weapon than Barkley, but they didn't utilize his strength, and he still got 1,000 yards rushing. So they left meat on the bone with him last year.
Sure. But I'm just, and it's nitpicking because we're talking about an 8-2 team. But again, they've been a 9-1 team in 2022. They were a 9-1 team last year. They're entitled Eagles land. They're supposed to be here. So all we're doing is nitpicking. And the offense, to me, there's something missing. It just feels wrong. Am I wrong, Mike Gill?
No, as I have highlights of the Rams offense, it looks like the greatest show on turf up on my screen over here. Is one thing I think is there's two things. One, the Rams offensive line is that good. It allows them to do a lot of things that even
Lions
if teams
talking about.
What's that?
Your Lions you're talking about, right? You mentioned
Detroit,
the Rams.
The Detroit offensive line allows them to do more with what they have. Their weapons get accentuated by the fact that their offensive line is far and away the best offensive line in the league. And the Eagles have a good offensive line. It's not on the level. I think the nastiness of the Lions offensive line is what sets them apart right now because they can just grab your soul and wear you out and take your lunch money and just absolutely will them to do what they want to do a lot of times.
Yeah, and then
Boy,
they have those
I mean,
versatile playmakers. I mean,
I think Detroit is the best team in football. I've said it pretty consistently by a pretty wide margin. Eagles fans get mad at me when I say that. However, I can't say their offensive line, which is great, is that much better than the Eagles' offensive line. They have a better center. Frank Ragnow's the best center in the NFL. Penei Sewell, in my opinion, is the best tackle in football. Kevin Zeitler's one of the best guards. But guess what? The Eagles got 2 great tackles.
Yeah.
They got Landon Dickerson, who's in the realm of Kevin Zeitler. Zeitler's probably having a little bit better of a year. And probably their weak spot is Graham Glasgow, and you could say Mekhi Becton's better than him. So I think if you look at it person for person, the Eagles' offensive line, Detroit might be slightly better, but it's not.
Does it look better in
blowout.
Detroit because the quarterback, like he's more of a drop back quarterback, 3-step drop, in there where Jalen can escape the pocket sometimes. Sometimes Jalen takes sacks and you're like, geez, that wasn't on the offensive line, but that's just part of his added playmaking ability. Maybe that factors into it.
Are the Eagles a better run blocking? Because I think we're the big, the nastiness of the Lions offensive line, I think, is a little different than the nastiness of the Eagles offensive line. And you watch the Lions, it doesn't seem that there's as much pressure on Goff, who's a statuesque kind of guy, and he's not bouncing in and out and he's standing back there with almost nothing in his face and just delivering. And by the way, give him credit. He delivers the football where it needs to be. And I think we go back to preconceived notions. We had preconceived notions that Goff was a bust and he got traded and he was at the Lions and and this guy has turned into an excellent thrower of the football and leading guys right where it needs to be. And I think we have this preconceived notion, Goff isn't any good. No, he's playing at a level that is allowing this offense to take off, because if he doesn't play at this offense, he's holding them back. And I guess it goes back to, is the Eagles offense not where it is? Is it 22 because somebody's holding them back?
Yeah. At Mike Gill Show, make sure you follow Mike on the X platform. Are you on Blue Sky yet, Mike? Everybody's shifting over.
God, are we promoting Blue Sky now?
No, I don't. I want to make fun of it. No.
I will say the Blue Sky is not a decision.
What happened to Threads, by the way? What happened to Threads?
Blue Sky will be the same thing, John. It'll come and go.
Here's the I've already seen this. This is what I've noticed, and this is the decisions that I think a lot of people in the media, maybe, I don't know, it could be politically.
It's political.
Yeah. The engagement of the links, which is these platforms are marketing platforms for your work.
Yeah.
The X platform is basically, if you put a link to a story, it is not allowing anybody to see those links. Whereas on the Blue Sky platform, you are getting more people clicking on your links because they are not suppressing the links. So the engagement has been stronger, even though I have far less followers. I'm already getting more traffic from Blue Sky because more people are actually seeing the link.
Yeah, wait till they fix the algorithm, Mike. It's very obvious. They don't want to show links because they want you to stay on Twitter. They don't want you to leave Twitter for YouTube.
Listen, I go where the work is getting looked at. If you stop clicking on the link on the Blue Sky, then I probably won't waste my time. But I'm getting very, very little traffic from the Twitter platform. It's very frustrating because I used to get a heck of a lot more from there, and I'm getting more traffic with less.
See, I did not know that, so I learned something new. I don't.
Yeah, well, there's no algorithm on the Blue Sky. Doesn't have an algorithm at this point. Now, once they're growing at such a rapid pace, they might start to figure things out and do things. But my point is, not a political decision by any stretch. Just more, hey, I put a story on one, I'm getting X amount of clicks, and on the other, I'm only getting Y amount of clicks, and I'd rather have X than Y.
I can respect that approach very much so for a guy that needs views and clicks and all those things. So I can understand that. And Mike, you got your Twitter or your YouTube on there too. I know you're streaming your show on YouTube. So everybody, we got how many watching on YouTube right now? 600 total, but 486 on YouTube. That means Mike Gill should have 486 new subscribers.
Yeah,
today.
we do our show. We do my show live every day now on the YouTube platform. We've been doing it for a while, but we just launched my YouTube channel.
Yeah,
we've been doing the show on the X platform, which, by the way, does get a lot of viewers. The X platform gets a lot of viewers because they do promote live links. They don't promote links that take you away from their site.
Because they want you to stay on X, Mike.
Correct.
They want you to stay on their platform.
So you can watch on X or you can subscribe to YouTube. And now John McMullen, you don't get to see his face. He's on the phone, but you'll see a lot of the guests and how the show kind of works. We're on 2 to 6 live on YouTube every day. So if you like these segments, you get 4 hours of me at 2 o'clock.
Good stuff, Mike. Thank you for joining, man. We appreciate it. Make sure you guys follow Mike on X, on Blue Sky, on YouTube, all over the place.
Throw threads in there.
I don't have a thread. No threads.
Right, no
throw MySpace in there.
Who has time to toggle back?
We got too many social media platforms. Holy shit!
I don't have the time to toggle back and forth from social media platforms.
John,
already, I'm like
YouTube, dude.
I'm getting prodded to promote this and promote that more. I'm like, I don't have time for this shit, man.
I hear you.
And
I'm running out of interns, man. My interns keep moving on, and they run a lot of my social media stuff sometimes.
Yeah. We need an intern, Zander. We need an intern.
Believe me, I know that. All right, Mike. Thanks for joining, brother. We appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, guys. See you.
Thanks.
See you, Mike.
From Mike Gill there on Birds 365. Love talking to Mike Gill. Johnny Mac, you're not going to end up on Blue Sky now, are you?
No, I'm not going to go. I don't have time.
I don't either, dude. I don't, like I said, I don't leave YouTube. This is where our money's made. I don't leave YouTube. I barely go on X.
A lot of people do the play-by-play of training camp. I'm like, I'm trying to watch fucking practice to learn about this team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Value what you value, but if you're valuing Twitter or X or Blue Sky, I mean, you're part of the problem.
I go where the people are, but YouTube, like I said, YouTube is what JAKIB is. So I care most about YouTube, obviously. John, everybody builds a following on all these.
Well, we have a 2-hour show. I'm talking about,
No, I know what you're talking about. Like, when you're at practice and Elliott Shore Parks has